Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. And if you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before I get started, I do like to go over some new announcements and discoveries that I just found out over the past week, and I don't have any to go over this week. There's not any huge announcements that I think are worth mentioning. There were a bunch of announcements last week, so if you want some news, you can check out last week's episode, but there's nothing really to bring up this time around, so we can just get straight into the episode. But before I do that, I do just want to say to check out Board Game Co. if you haven't done that already. He offers a ton of great content and is constantly on top of new games coming out, and we do work together putting together these lists that I'm presenting to you today, so I do appreciate you giving him a bit of support as well. You'll find a link to his channel in the description below, and you can go subscribe to him while we check out this week's campaigns. And the first campaign we have launches on October 24th, and this one's called Tabriz, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this is a game where players are essentially trying to complete different objective cards, and you're going to be trying to gather different resources to create different sets in order to fulfill the requirements of those cards. But the catch here is that you're trying to gather these materials in a market that is constantly fluctuating. Some of the materials might be in high supply, while at other times they might be completely sold out. Not only that, but players are going to have to move to a certain location in order to use that location in the market, and each player is going to be limited in the amount of movement that they can perform, so you're probably going to want to try and take advantage of the opportunities around you. But each round, players are going to be taking turns performing actions, and you're going to have 3 meeples that you can move around the board, and you're going to be able to perform an action for each meeple depending on the locations that they stop on. And you'll be able to gain resources at these different locations either by buying those resources, trading your existing resources for other ones, or by rolling dice. And even though each of your meeples are going to be very limited in their movement, they can be upgraded. And players are going to be doing that by completing these different objective cards. You're allowed to complete 1 objective card per turn, and the objective cards will do things like grant you victory points, money, skill, which can be spent to unlock more movement for your meeples, unlock better commissions, or allow you to complete multiple commissions in a single round. And the end of the game is triggered as soon as a single player completes 9 or more commissions or gains the maximum of 14 skill. And at that point, the player with the most victory points wins the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, definitely go ahead and follow along because it'll also get you a free promo punch board that you can include into your game. And I have links to all these campaigns in the description below. And the next campaign we have launching on October 24th is for the expansion for CoraQuest called CoraQuest Keep On Questing. And this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play. This expansion is going to be adding a whole bunch more content to the game. There's going to be new playable characters and new scenarios. But the biggest thing it's adding is a campaign mode. And this is going to provide rules for players to link different adventures together, level up their characters between quests, and carry over the different treasure and items that they've found into the following quests. The expansion offers 2 campaigns, each with 5 new scenarios for players to play through. And if you're not familiar with CoraQuest, it is a game that I covered in the past, and I'll go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And this is a family-weight cooperative dungeon crawler where players are going to be different adventurers journeying into a dungeon, and they're going to be doing things like exploring the dungeon, avoiding traps, finding treasures, fighting monsters, and occasionally making some heroic rescues. This game does use a modular board, and as you put the tiles out, the different icons are going to dictate what sort of items or monsters appear there. You can also run into the occasional quest, and the combat in this game is resolved with dice rolling, and the successes you get will all inflict 1 damage each. And if you happen to roll really badly and completely miss your opponent, your character actually goes into a determined mode where they get to roll more dice the next time. This helps keep things a little more interesting and also takes away a little bit of that sting that comes with that bad roll. All players also have a special ability, and when you use that ability, you put a token out on a countdown track, and that token is going to move down the track each round until it comes off the board, and when it comes off, you can use that ability again. There's also a threat token put out on this track, and if a round completes with no one further exploring the dungeon, then that threat token moves forward, and when it comes off the track, a swarm of spiders comes and attacks the players. There's a couple interesting things about this game that make it a little bit different than the other campaigns, and for that reason I'm making it my pick of the week. And the first thing I want to mention is that this game does come playable straight out of the box, but it's also designed in such a way that allows for family creativity and customization so you can change the game and modify it to your liking. And I think this is just a really fun idea and encourages you to get involved with your kids, and I think that can be really exciting for a family to experience a little bit of what designing a game is like, and then also have that enjoyment of playing through it and knowing that it's something that you created together. And another really cool thing about this game is that all the artwork was actually drawn by kids. And I know on the surface that might not sound like the greatest idea, and you could end up with your artwork very disjointed, but how all this was done is that the artwork was actually sent in to the CoraQuest team, and then they had a professional artist take that artwork and bring it to life and blend it together with a singular style while still maintaining that original charm of the children's drawings. And they do have a lot of images showing what these original children's drawings look like before and after they were worked into the game, and I think the artist did an amazing job staying true to those original designs. I love the look of the final product, and I think it's very unique, and I like that it has that little story behind it. And if you want to know more, I got links in the description below. Also launching on October 24th, we have Varmints the card game, and this plays 2 players and takes just 15 to 30 minutes to play, and this is a competitive head-to-head card battler. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to have 3 lanes of cards in front of them, with each player having a stack of cards in each of those lanes. And the goal of the game is to try and deplete all 3 of your opponent's stacks of cards before they deplete yours. And the way that you do that is that each round players are going to draw up to their hand of cards, and then they're going to take turns playing cards into the different lanes, and each of the cards is going to have some amount of strength, and the player that has the least amount of strength in a lane at the end of the round is going to lose 1 card from their stack. But when players are taking turns placing cards into the different lanes, they have the option to either play a card face down or to play a card face up. And if you're playing a card face up, that's how you add its strength into that lane, and you also get the added bonus of being able to activate its special ability. But if you play a card face down, it doesn't really do anything at that specific moment, but it allows you to add a backup card later. And in order to play a backup card, you're going to have to discard one of those face down cards, and then that will allow you to play another card from your hand into that pile, and then add its secondary strength to the base strength of your original card. But the catch here is that any of these backup cards that you play will be discarded at the end of the round, so you really want to use them sparingly. If on a following round you play another face-up card into a lane that you already have a face-up card, then that existing one is going to get flipped over and just become a face-down card. And the first player to discard all their opponent's cards from each lane wins the game. And the next campaign we have launches on October 25th, and this one's called Destinies Witchwood, and this plays 1 to 3 players and takes about 90 to 150 minutes to play, and this is the next game in the Destinies series of games, and these games aren't necessarily related to each other, but they do follow and share the same type of system, which is that they're all competitive, app-guided, story-driven games, where players are going to be choosing asymmetrical characters and attempting to complete their destinies. But this is a system that just offers quite a lot of variability, because not only do you have different characters and different scenarios, but the decisions that you make in a scenario, as well as your successes and failures with those decisions, is going to send you down different trajectories that can completely change the outcome of the game. And it doesn't really matter where you get to at the end of the game from a story perspective, as long as you're completing one of those 2 objectives. But depending on how well you're performing, you might be getting there just a little bit faster than your opponents, and hopefully you're the one to get there first, because that will mean that you have won the game. But the way that the game works is that players will choose a scenario, and then the app will guide them how to set up the boards for that scenario, and then players are going to be taking turns performing different actions. On your turn, you'll be able to move up to 2 tiles, and you'll be able to reveal any unexplored tiles, and each tile is going to have some sort of interaction that players can engage with. And once a player chooses to stop on a particular tile, they'll be able to perform one of the actions that are available there. And in order to do that, you're going to be using the mobile app, which usually is going to present the player with a few different options, each with different skill checks in different types of skills, and players can choose which one that they want to try and perform. And generally, performing well in these skill checks moves you closer towards your destiny, while performing poorly can be detrimental. And not only do these actions potentially move you closer towards your destiny, but they might present different opportunities to gain or purchase different item cards that can grant you special abilities, and they can also gain you experience points, which you can spend to modify your skill tracks. And of course, this iteration of the game is offering more of a horror-style theme, where players are going to be able to go up against ancient magics and explore a woodland labyrinth. And if you are interested in this iteration of the game, it is important to note that this will require the base game in order to play, which does mean you're going to have to put in a much larger investment in order to play this new expansion. So if you are able to figure out some way to play the original game, I would highly recommend that, so you understand if this is a game that you're interested in. And if it is, you can find links in the description below. And the next campaign we have launching on the 25th is actually a campaign that I thought was launching last week, but it got pushed back until this week. And this is for 20 Strong, which is the next game from Chip Theory Games. And since I already did cover this one last week, I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now. and this one is actually a solo game that takes about 20 to 30 minutes to play, and this one is called 20 Strong, the Solar Sentinels. And in this game, players are going to be using just 20 dice as they're trying to get through an entire deck of cards, and if they're able to get through that deck of cards, they win the game. And each card in the deck is going to have a different challenge for the player to try and complete, and the player is going to be rolling 17 dice of varying hit probabilities, trying to roll enough successes to complete that challenge, and if they're able to do so, they will move on to the next card and also get the rewards of that card. But there's also 3 stats that the player is going to have to track, and these are your health, your rerolls, and your recovery stats, and you're going to be tracking these by using 3 separate dice, where your health is obviously your health, and if you get to 0 before you get through the deck, then you lose the game. Your rerolls is the number of dice that you're allowed to try to reroll for each challenge, and then your recovery is how many rolled dice you can recover each round, which means that if you're rolling more than that amount, you won't be getting those back to use in your future challenges. So you can start to see that as you're going through the deck and trying to complete these different challenges, there's going to be times where you're going to want to roll more dice than what you are capable of, which means that you're going to be slimming down your pool as the game goes on. And this campaign is going to be offering 3 different decks, each with their own unique mechanisms and themes. And the first one is the main deck, which is the Solar Sentinels theme, which looks like it's going to be taking place out in space. And then there is also a Too Many Bones theme and a Hoplomachus theme. So if you're familiar with some of the previous games from Chip Theory Games, you will be able to play this game within those worlds. And if this one sounds interesting to you, you can find links in the description below. And another campaign that is also launching on the 25th, but is also a relaunch that I already covered in the past, is Hike It, the backpacking board game. This plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play. And like I said, this is a campaign that I already did cover in the past, so I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And also launching on the 16th, we have Hike It, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a competitive survival trail hiking game where players are going to be hiking across the Smoky Mountains. And players are trying to gain the most victory points, and the way that you do that is by visiting different scenic locations. This hike is not going to be an easy one, so you're going to have to make sure that you're well fed and hydrated as you make it through the mountains, and also that you're taking advantage of the gear that you have at your disposal, while also avoiding the dangers and wildlife of the mountain that pose a threat. The game offers a detailed board of the Smoky Mountains that players will be able to navigate, and the mountains will always have some sort of active weather pattern and a 4-day forecast of what's to come. And you'll want to be aware of what weather's coming up, because you'll want to make sure that you have the appropriate gear, or that you have enough water to get through the heat or snow or rain or whatever the weather is throwing your way. But the thing that I like most about this game is that you do want to carry gear, but you don't want to carry too much gear, because each piece of gear that you're carrying is going to occupy one of your movement spaces, so that the more gear you have, the less movement you can actually make on your turn. So you're going to have to find that balance, providing yourself with enough gear that you feel safe, but then still giving yourself enough movement that you feel like you can get to your next checkpoint. And the player that has the most points at the end of the game wins the game. Also launching on October 25th, we have Tesseract, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a cooperative game that I personally think looks like a ton of fun. It's offering something of a little bit more unique experience, where players are going to be using a turntable with a giant cube on it that's made up of smaller cubes. And the goal of the game is to try and move enough of the cubes from that main cube onto the containment board into their appropriate spots. And if you're able to fill up that entire board, then you win the game. Otherwise, if the main cube completely runs out of cubes before you're able to do that, or if 7 breaches occur, then all players will lose the game. And the way that the breaches work is that at the end of each turn, you're going to be taking 1 of those cubes from the Tesseract and then rolling it and adding it to the pool of rolled dice. And if you ever get 3 of the same in that pool, then that's going to cause a breach. But each player is going to be playing as their own asymmetrical character with a special ability, as well as an additional ability that you can unlock later in the game. And on a turn, you can perform 3 actions, and the different actions are to move a cube from the main cube into your own personal board, which is your research lab. And the reason that you're doing this is to try and create sets of cubes that are either all completely the same or all completely different. And you do have a few more actions to help you here, because you can also use one of your actions to rotate one of the dice to an adjacent side, or you can use an action to transfer a cube from your board to another player's where it might be more useful. Or if you already have all of the same cubes or all completely different cubes on your board, then you can use an action to move one of those cubes to the containment track. but there's only one spot for each combination of color and shape on the cube, so you're going to be trying to match up cubes in such a way that you're able to fill up the missing spots. But as an added bonus here, if you're able to complete a full column, that's going to unlock a one-time use special ability card that all the players can decide to use at any point in the game, or if you complete a complete row, then you'll be able to put one cube back onto the Tesseract, extending the amount of time that you have in order to try and win the game. The players can also gain research cards throughout the game, which they can use on their turn if they so choose, but you can also spend an action to upgrade your research card to the next level research card, which will give you a stronger ability. And if the players are able to do all this well and complete that containment track, then they win the game. And if you want to know more or check out this campaign for yourself, I got links in the description below. And also launching on October 25th, we have the Queen's Dilemma, and there's no player count or time up on BoardGameGeek yet, but this is labeled as a reimplementation of the King's Dilemma, which plays 3 to 5 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play. And although this is labeled as a reimplementation, I don't think it completely replaces the King's Dilemma. What it's really doing is expanding on the core system, so if you like the core elements of the game and you'd rather have a simpler, more easy to teach version of the game, I think the King's Dilemma is probably your choice. But if you want to expand on it and you want to have a little bit more complexity, I think the Queen's Dilemma is what you're going to want to look at here. And the way that the King's Dilemma works is that each player is playing as different houses and they're trying to affect the stability of an overall kingdom. And in order to represent this, players are going to be moving tokens up and down on a track, and the different tokens are going to represent different areas of the kingdom, such as your gold or your food or your science. But anytime that a token moves up or down, there's also a main stability token that's going to move along with it. But something important to know about the way that this track works is that anytime a token moves upward, it's going to be flipped to its lighter side, whereas when it moves downward, it's going to be flipped to its darker side. And if a token moves twice in the same direction, it's going to actually move an additional space, and it's also going to get this little arrow attached to it. And then if it moves in the same direction again, it's going to move ahead 2 extra spaces. So if something's consecutively moving in the same direction, it's really going to gain momentum. And some players might really love the extra movement of those different tokens, while other players will want to put a stop to it right away, because each player is going to have their own personal objective that's asking them to try and get this board into a particular state. And the core mechanism to this game is the way that players manipulate this board, because each round you're going to be drawing an event card, and it's going to have a couple options that can move tokens in different directions, and players are going to be voting on which option that they want to enact. And in order to vote, you're going to be spending vote tokens towards one of the 2 options. And if you really want a particular outcome, you can actually spend as many vote tokens as you have available. Or if you don't really care which option gets enacted, or if you just don't have many vote tokens left, you can also choose to pass. And the nice thing about passing is that any of the vote tokens that get spent on that particular vote will then be split between the people that passed once the results are tallied. So this is a great way to get vote tokens back into your possession and be more prepared for the next vote. And something that's pretty important, and I probably should have mentioned sooner, is that both of these games are actually legacy games. So throughout the game, depending on which votes get enacted, that might require you to open different envelopes, which can chain into other votes or other events or actions happening. And this can also sometimes grant certain decision power to whoever contributed the most votes to the winning side, which can allow that player to choose from some different options and place stickers or make permanent changes to the game, and will also affect the narrative that the game unfolds. Players will also be unlocking different achievements throughout the game, and if they're able to do that, it will unlock special abilities for them. And the Queen's Dilemma is going to share a lot of these elements, especially the voting and the legacy elements, but instead of just having a single track that all the players are focused on, it's going to be more focused on regions of the kingdom, and players will be able to take control of the different regions and manipulate the different areas individually, and you'll also be able to gain resources in order to build different buildings among the different regions. There's not a whole lot more info out on this one right now, but if you want to know more, I got links in the description below. And the next campaign we have launching on the 25th is the Aegean Sea, and this plays 2 to 5 players. It takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play, and this was a game that I did cover in the past, so I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now. First campaign I'm not going to cover too deeply because I was expecting it to launch in September, and I did have an exact date for it, but when I checked their backer kit, it says that they're launching in 31 days, but it also still says that they're launching in September, so I'm not quite sure on this one. It might launch, it might not. This is a game that plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play, and this takes place in the Greek Aegean Sea. And in this game, your cards are going to be acting as islands that are going to be put out on the different areas of the table. And then players are going to be using their boats and temples in order to move around population and resources and to use the actions available at each of the islands. Temples will allow you to draw more cards into your hand, which is what you're going to be using for your own personal actions, and then using those actions to try and generate more goods, because that's how you score victory points, and the player with the most victory points is going to win the game. And also launching on October 25th, we have the Zoo Tycoon, and this plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 120 to 180 minutes to play, and although this is based on the Zoo Tycoon video game, I really do think this board game has an impressive design, and it really does stand on its own. And at the core of this game is a tile placement, and players are going to be starting with an empty park, and they're going to be building up the park by placing different enclosure tiles, placing different shops and restaurants, and trying to balance your conservation with your popularity. And of course, a zoo is not a zoo unless you also have animals, and this game has a ton of different animals, each with unique animal meeples, and in order to add these animals to your zoo, you're going to have to create the right environment for them. Not only that, but you're also going to have to manage their well-being, and you'll even be able to breed them between the different seasons. And the way that a player wins this game is that they want to have the most victory points, but the way that the victory points work in this game is that it is the lowest of either your popularity or your conservation. So raising your popularity is really helpful because it's going to allow you to raise more money and invest in your park to expand it more. But your conservation is also important because it's going to allow you to get sponsors and get free tiles and items added to your park. But you do need both of them because whichever one is lower is going to be the one that dictates the amount of victory points that you have for that game. And the game plays over 8 rounds, each with 4 phases, which each represent a season. And each season is going to allow some actions to each of the players, but you're also going to be able to put different staff meeples out on different areas of the board in order to take some additional actions. But of course, the more staff you have, the more it will cost you. And the first phase is the spring phase, where an event card is going to get drawn that can affect all the players and the game overall. But this is also a phase in the game where animals can have offspring if they're able to. And in order for your animals to have offspring, there's going to be a few requirements that they have to meet. First, they're going to have a certain level of happiness. You're also going to have at least one male in the same enclosure as the animal that you're trying to breed. And that animal can't already be a mother. And some animals will be mothers for longer periods than others. So depending on the animal that you're trying to breed, you might have to wait longer in between rounds before you can breed that particular animal again. And breeding your animals is pretty helpful, not only for getting more animals into your zoo, but everyone loves to see baby animals, and that will increase your popularity. And then we move into the summer phase, which is all about the zoo market, where players are going to be gaining and losing animals. But one thing to note here is that you're never selling or purchasing animals. Instead, you just need to meet the requirements for that animal, and you can just take that animal into your park. Something that's really interesting and unique about the market board is that it's actually made up of 2 boards, the top one having the different animals on it, but then the bottom one's going to have the supply and demand. And the supply and demand is going to change from round to round, and in order to change it, you're just going to be sliding the top board in a random direction, which is going to reveal different values for supply and demand. And if something is in supply, then it's going to have a green number and a value of how many animals are available, whereas if something is in demand, it's going to have a red value and how many animals that you can get rid of. And each animal type is going to have 2 values associated with it, one representing the male gender while the other represents the female. So you can actually have one of the genders in supply while the other one is more in demand, or they could both be in supply or both in demand, but those numbers don't necessarily have to correlate to each other in any way. They can be completely different, or they could happen to be the same. And then we move into the autumn phase, where each player is going to gain a certain amount of enclosure tiles, and you can also gain some bonus tiles if you have the highest conservation value at this point, or if you're meeting certain requirements of the donor card. There's going to be a couple different donor cards out on the board, and if you're able to meet the requirement of that card by the time this phase starts, then you'll also get whatever bonus that donor is offering. It's also at this point in the game where players will actually be able to construct and build up their zoo, where you're going to be placing those enclosure tiles to create different areas to house the animals, and then also placing the animals if you're able to meet their placement requirements, and then also placing any other attractions or shops or restaurants that you might have available. And you can also purchase these additional tiles, and these can do different things like reduce costs or increase revenue, raise popularity or conservation, and they'll have varying effects depending on how you place them in your park. Then we move into the winter phase, where players will be gaining points in conservation and popularity depending on their performance so far, and also gaining revenue from whichever income sources that they have available. And at the end of the 8 rounds, the player with the most points wins the game. Also launching on October 25th, we have Artisans, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. And this is a really interesting game where each player is going to be playing as their own asymmetrical artisan with their own special ability. And essentially what players are doing is they're trying to draft different cards of different material types and use those cards in order to increase their skill in using that particular material in order to craft different items. Players are going to be trying to craft these different items in order to gain victory points. But of course, each item is going to be constructed out of different material types, and you're going to need the appropriate skill in each of those types in order to craft that card. And on a turn, you'll be able to take one of these cards if you meet the requirements for it, and you'll also be able to take one of the cards from the display if you are not already at your hand limit. But if you are at your hand limit, then you can trade one of the cards in your hand to one of the cards in the display. The only catch here is that you can't place a card adjacent to a card of the same type. So if you wanted to take this thread, you wouldn't be able to put a wood or a glass there because there's already a wood and a glass adjacent to it. And you might notice that each of these cards has some different numbers around each of the corners. And on your turn, you'll be able to play one card from your hand into your tableau. And the way that the tableau works is that when you're placing into your tableau, you always are going to be putting like cards into the same column, and you're going to be stacking these on top of each other, and you can put same level cards on top of the same level, but you always have to start at the lowest level and then you have to go up from there. So if you have a level 1 card in play, you can put a level 2 on top of it. And once you have a level 2, you can put a level 3 on top of it. But the catch here is that you can't put more higher level cards than you have lower level cards. So if you only have one level 1 in play, then you can only put one level 2. So you're going to want to make sure that you're putting as many lower level cards so that you don't get stuck in a corner where you're not able to get as many higher level skill cards as you need to complete a particular objective. But the game continues like this, with players taking turns drafting more cards into their hand in order to increase their skill, and then meet the requirements of the different item cards, which will then earn them victory points. And once all those item cards are depleted, the player with the most points wins the game. And if you're interested in this one, make sure to follow along with the campaign, because that will add a mystery gift to your pledge, which will be revealed on launch. Also launching on October 25th, we have Fit to Print, and this plays 1 to 6 players. It takes about 15 to 30 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game where each player is going to be running their own newspaper outlet. And in this game, players are going to be starting the game with a blank newspaper grid, and then there's going to be a whole bunch of tiles out in the middle of the table, and players are going to be racing to add those to their own specific newspaper. But the catch here is that each newspaper is going to be starting with a centerpiece, and players are going to be starting with that already on their board. Then it's going to have certain objectives and scoring opportunities that players are trying to match up in order to maximize their scoring potential, and you'll be trying to meet those requirements by finding the appropriate tiles out in the middle of the table, then adding those ones to your board. And of course, all the tiles are going to come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and you don't know which ones are ads or articles or photos, but you do know the orientation, because on the back of each of the tiles there's going to be some fake text, and just looking at the way that that text is oriented is going to let you know which way that the tile is oriented on the other side. And if you're familiar with Galaxy Trucker, this game works almost the same way when it comes to drafting the tiles, because all players are going to be racing to get those tiles first, and you can only grab a tile with one hand, and you can't look at it until it's over your board. And if you decide that it's not a tile that you want to keep, you put it back in the shared pool, but you're going to be putting it face up. But the thing that makes this one a lot different is that you're not allowed to put these tiles onto your board when you draft them. Instead, you will need to draft all the tiles first, and once you think you have enough to complete your newspaper, then you're going to stop, and then you need to put all your tiles onto your board. So there is a bit of a push your luck element here, where you're trying to draft enough tiles to fill up your newspaper as much as possible, but you don't want to draft more than what you need, because any tiles left over are going to cost you points. You're also generally trying to avoid having empty spaces in your newspaper, but it's not the worst problem to have, because only the player that has the most white space left over is going to be the one that loses points for that. But each round, players are going to be tallying up their scores based on the newspapers that they've created, and then the next round will continue with continually larger boards, which are going to make it more and more difficult for you to estimate how many tiles you need. It also makes each round feel a little bit different, and also a bit more frantic, because you only have a limited time to get all those tiles. So if you have a bigger area, you're going to be trying to move a little bit faster. And of course, the player with the most points at the end of the game wins, and if you're interested in this one, I have links to their website in the description below where you can sign up to get notified of launch. And also launching on October 25th, we have the expansion and reprint for the game Hidden Leaders, which plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 20 to 40 minutes to play. But if you're not familiar with Hidden Leaders or how it plays, this is a game that I did cover in the past, and I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And Hidden Leaders is a game where the Emperor has died and his people are on the brink of civil war. Involved in this war are 4 factions, each with their own objective. 2 of these factions are going to be in direct conflict with each other, and these factions are displayed with tokens on the power track. The goal of these factions is simple: to be further along on the track by the end of the game. The 3rd faction doesn't have a token, but its goal is to see peace between these 2 rival factions, so its win condition is if both of these tokens are on the same space at game end. And the 4th and final faction is the Undead faction, and they also do not have a token, but they want to see the war escalate as much as possible. So they win if both of these tokens are in this dark zone by the end of the game. Players do not play as these factions, but instead they'll be representing one of the Emperor's 6 children that are competing for the throne. These children are represented on cards that are known as leaders, and you guessed it, they remain hidden throughout the game. At the start of the game, each player is dealt one of these cards that only they can look at. Each one of these leader cards will display 2 different factions that the respective player can support. So in order to win the game, one of those 2 factions' win conditions must be met. On a player's turn, they'll be drawing, discarding, and playing different hero cards that will manipulate the power track, moving those tokens up and down the board. Cards played will be put in front of the player face up, but other cards may enter this area face down as well. Some cards may have abilities allowing for special actions throughout the game. Each hero card that you put into your play area is going to be associated with one of the 4 factions, and that may be important at the end of the game. The end of the game is triggered as soon as one player's face-up cards reaches a certain number, depending on the player count. At that point, the state of the power board will determine the winning faction. If this faction is one that your leader can support, then you win the game. If there's multiple players that can support that winning faction, it's the one that has the most of that faction's hero cards in their play area that takes the win. I'm really impressed with the design on this one, and that's one of the reasons that I'm making this game my pick of the week. Everything in this game looks super tight, and I really love the different dynamics that the factions have on that power board, but I think what makes that really work is that each player can actually have 2 options of the factions that they can support. This little detail gives more options to the player, inherently making the game less random, but it also allows players to shift their primary goal throughout the game depending on the opportunities that arise. And I do think that players will shift their strategies throughout the game because more and more information is provided as the game goes on. Since all the players' leader cards are hidden, nobody really knows what the other players are trying to achieve. They can only speculate based on the actions that they see those players perform. I'm personally not a huge fan of deduction games because it's too often that the information that you get is so subjective that the game just ends up feeling random. But the implementation of the deduction elements in this game seems really well done, and I'm really confident that this will not have that problem because players are deducing based on the actions of the other player and not on the social aspects of the game. I really like that, so I want to congratulate the designers here on some great work by turning a mechanism that I'm usually pretty averse to into something that I'm actually excited about. This expansion is going to be adding 3 new modules that you can mix into the game. The first module is going to be adding a new faction, 4 new leaders, and 20 new heroes. And something that's really interesting about this specific module is that it actually adds a shared race that all players will have access to and use to their advantage. But also, if you use that race too much, it's actually going to cause them to win the game and cause all the players to lose. But then the second module is going to be adding a brand new deck of cards known as the Artifacts. And the way that this works is that you can mix and match them with your different leader cards, and they're going to grant your leader with a special ability that you can use 2 to 3 times during the entire game. So this is going to give you some special abilities that you can take advantage of, but you're going to want to time it right because you can only use it so many times in a game. And then the third module is going to be adding some brand new tokens called corruption tokens, and then twice per game you'll be able to use those tokens to change the alliances of your heroes or the alliances of your opponents. But you really have to be careful when you're doing this because players can also use these tokens to set up traps, and if you try to mess with their heroes, it could come with a negative consequence for you. And if this one sounds interesting to you and you want to get notified, you can find links to the campaign in the description below. And also launching on October 25th is a game that I thought was launching last week, but it got pushed to this week. And this is the expansion to Oceans called Oceans Legends of the Deep. And this is a really popular game, and I think you'll probably want to check it out. So I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. is a competitive game where players are competing to have the most fish. And the way this works is that players are going to be playing cards in order to migrate fish to their boards, or to create a new species of fish by taking a fish board and putting it in front of them and assigning one of the cards to that board. Or if you already have one of those boards out, you can also add more traits to an existing species. And the placement of your different fish species relative to each other does matter because there is adjacency between them, and even adjacency between your fish and your opponent's fish. And a lot of the different species that you'll create will have traits that can be affected by the fish adjacent to them, or can affect or attack those fish themselves. And the fish board that's associated with your fish species represents their population, and you can increase this by attacking other players successfully, or by foraging for more fish. There's also some special ways through abilities that you might be able to modify this, but if you ever end up filling up your board, you actually overpopulate, which is detrimental to your species and cuts your population in half. And in addition to that, each round your fish are going to age, which is going to cost you 1 population from each of your species of fish. And if that population ever runs out, then that species of fish is going to go extinct and you're going to be removing it from the table. And a really neat aspect about this game is that about halfway through you're going to be experiencing the Cambrian explosion, which was a historical period in time where evolution was happening very rapidly. When this happens in the game, you're going to be moving essentially twice as fast because you're going to be able to draw 2 cards each turn, but then at the end of each turn you're going to be losing 2 population per species. This also allows players to access the traits of the deep sea fish, which will have some more advanced abilities. And this new expansion is going to be adding more mythical and fantastical creatures into the game. At the start of the game, each player is going to be drafting 4 of these new legend cards, and these cards are going to have game-changing abilities and global effects. And during your turn, you'll have the option to play one of these cards in addition to your normal card play. And you can also pay the difference between 2 cards if you want to swap out your old legend card for a new one. This is another game that was a very close runner-up for our Discord pick of the week. And if you're interested in this one, you can find links to it in the description below. And you can also download this game on your mobile phone. I believe it's free, so if you do want to try it before you buy it, that's also a great option. And the next campaign, also launching October 25th, is called Survival of the Fattest. And this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a competitive game where players are playing as asymmetrical woodland critters, each with their own unique deck of cards and special ability and food requirements, because you will have to feed your woodland critter before the end of the game if you want to win. But feeding your critter will also upgrade their special ability into an even more powerful version. Players are going to draw up to their hand of 5 cards, and then the game plays over 12 rounds where each player is going to be able to move to a new action location and perform the action there, which can allow them to do different things like gain recipe cards, which can grant them victory points for the end of the game, or can also grant them special abilities. But players can also move to other locations where they can gain different ingredient cards, which can be used to try and fulfill those recipes, or trade in the less useful cards that they have for more useful ones. But each round players will also be able to play as many cards from their hand as they like, and there's going to be numbers on all these cards, and these are going to add to your initiative value. And the way that this works is that an equal number of cards to the total number of cards that were played by all players is going to be drawn, but then whichever player has the total highest initiative value is going to get first dibs on drafting the cards from that pool of cards that was just drawn. And these different cards that you're playing or gaining can also have different ability cards that could get activated, but any cards that you gain are going to go straight into your discard pile, which is going to create a sort of deck building element, and you won't get access to those again until they get drawn back into your hand. And at the end of your turn, you can discard as many cards from your hand as you like and then draw back up to your hand limit. And the player with the most victory points at the end of 3 rounds wins the game. And launching on October 25th, we have Cosmoctopus, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a competitive game where each player is going to be starting out with their own octopus in space, and you want to be the first player to retrieve all 8 of its tentacles. And the way this game works is that there's going to be a few different randomized action tiles in the center of the table, and players are going to be taking turns moving the octopus 1 space orthogonally. Wherever the octopus lands, that player will be able to perform that action. And this is usually going to gain you new cards or resources, which you're going to want to collect to try and win the game, because there's a few different cards that you can collect. Some can grant you a permanent upgrade or a one-time use ability, but the most important one here is the one that helps you win the game, and that is the objective cards. And if you are able to fulfill these objective cards, that will grant you 1 more tentacle to your octopus. And the way that these cards work is that they have a few different icons pictured on them with arrows between the icons. And what that represents is the resources that you need to add to that card in that particular order in order to fulfill its requirement. But in order to add those resources to the card, there can't be resources that you already have in your possession. Instead, you can only add resources to this card when you are actually collecting those resources. But that's not the only way that you can gain tentacles, because you can also trade in 13 of any resource to complete these forbidden knowledge tokens, but there is only one of each token, so this is a bit of a race. But once you've achieved 13 of those tokens, you can just trade them in for that forbidden knowledge, and that will grant you 1 tentacle. But if you do want to go that route, you will have to plan ahead, because each round you're going to be discarding down to the maximum of 8 resources, which means that you're going to have to collect the additional ones that you need within the round that you spend them if you want to be able to get those forbidden knowledge tokens. And the first player to complete their octopus wins the game, and if you want to check this one out, I got links in the description below. Also launching on October 25th, we have Merchants of Karanor, and this plays 2 to 6 players. It takes about 45 to 75 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game where players are racing to be the first to gain 10 notoriety. And the way this game works is that players are going to be taking turns, and on your turn you can perform 4 actions. And the different actions you can do is to move 2 spaces around the board, or you can collect 2 of the resources available at the location that you're currently visiting, or if you're on a location that has a local, you can gain a quest from that local, which is going to give you some sort of objective and a reward if you're able to complete that objective. These objectives come in the form of cards that you'll be able to add into your hand and complete at any point during the game. Or if you're currently located at a city location, you can pay a cost to open up a place of commerce there, which is going to earn you an income at the end of each round, but you can only have 1 building at each of the different cities on the board. But in addition to these main actions, there's also some special actions that players can perform. These are going to be outlined on the board, and the first of those actions is to complete a delivery, and this is going to be outlined on a card that's going to be changing throughout the game. And as players complete a delivery, they're going to gain the benefits of that card, but then a new card is going to replace it. So players are going to be racing to complete this before they know which card is going to come next. Or players can just pay a cost to purchase an associate tile, which will get added to their player board. And this is going to work similarly to your income generation, but instead of generating income, it's going to generate a certain type of resource. But each associate also comes with a special action, and if you choose to use it, you're going to be flipping that tile to its backside, which is going to cause it to just generate a coin rather than the resource that it was originally generating. Or finally, you can just purchase your own personal villa and place it out on the board, and this is just going to come at a higher cost, but this just directly transfers into victory points. But this is also a game of negotiation, because everything in the game can be traded, sold, or bartered to the other players, and the first player to reach 10 notoriety wins the game. Also launching on October 25th, we have Aerodome, and this plays 1 to 8 players and takes about 20 to 45 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game of aerial combat. And the way this game works is that each player is going to have their own fighter ship out on the table, and at the start of each round, each player is going to be choosing an action card to play in secret, and this is going to have an initiative value and a sequence of actions on it. Players will simultaneously reveal this, and then the player with the highest initiative will be able to perform their actions first. Players must perform the actions from top to bottom, but you can also skip any of the actions that don't have a lock icon associated with them. And of course, you're going to be using these actions to try and maneuver yourself into the best position to attack your opponents, and each of the cards will dictate how many battle dice you get to roll when you do attack. And also, you're going to want to think about maneuvering yourself out of battle so that you're not in the line of fire of your opponents at the end of the turn. Different cards will come with different pros and cons in these different areas, and it's going to be up to you to decide what best suits your needs at that moment in time. And the different cards can also have all sorts of different keywords that can mean different things and trigger different events to happen. And at the end of the round, your cards will go back into your hands unless they have a dazed keyword, and in that case, you're not allowed to play them again until you play a card that has the recovery keyword. And the last fighter standing wins the game. And now for games launching on the 26th, we have 2 games that I just discovered, so I wasn't able to do much research on these games, so I'm not going to get into them in too much detail, but the first one is called Freezing Inferno, and this is a 2-player head-to-head game, and this one is set in World War II during 1939 to 1940 in the conflict between the USSR and Finland. And if you're interested in war games, this one's going to have a bit of diplomacy as well as battle mechanics as well. And if you want to know more, I'll have links in the description below. And then the other game launching on the 26th is called Tanto Cuore, and this plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 45 minutes to play, and this is a game where you're trying to become king of the maids. I don't know exactly what that means, but this does seem to have more of a mature or adult theme, and it does play into a little bit of that anime culture that, well, is what it is. This seems like a game where you're going to be using their cards for their special abilities to gain victory points, but also affect your opponents negatively with a little bit of take that. Not going to get into this one too heavily, but if you're interested, there's links in the description below. And launching on October 26th, we have the next campaign from Copan, and this one is Cthulhu Death May Die, Fear of the Unknown. And of course, this is the expansion to the game Cthulhu Death May Die, which is a cooperative game for 1 to 5 players and takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And this one is also our Discord pick of the week, and it's no surprise because this is a really amazing game. If you're a fan of games like Zombicide, this one isn't too far a stretch from that game, but I think it adds so much more that makes it a lot more fun, at least for me. It shares a lot of similarities in that it is scenario based, where you're going to be trying to complete different objectives that are outlined by that scenario, and you're going to be setting up the scenario according to the booklet, but each scenario is also going to come with its own little box of components and some different mechanisms that make the scenarios quite a bit different from each other. And I was really impressed with the variety that you get with these scenarios. Some of the scenarios actually feel like a completely different game in the amount of variety that they offer. But in addition to this, you can actually mix and match the scenarios with the different final bosses or elder gods that the game offers, and there's quite a lot of those as well, and they all play a little bit differently and are of varying difficulties as well. So if you feel like a scenario is too hard, you can always mix it in with one of the easier final bosses, or vice versa. But then, of course, there are a lot of different characters, and all the characters have different abilities and different upgradable abilities. And then on top of that, you're also going to mix in a different insanity with each of your characters, and that's also going to give you something of an ailment that can be very costly to you, but if you use it appropriately, it can be super beneficial. And that's where a lot of the fun comes in this game, because each of your insanities is going to be triggered by some sort of event, and you're going to be trying to time that so that when that insanity triggers, it's going to give you something beneficial. For example, your insanity could be that you are a pyromaniac, and whenever that gets activated, you're going to be setting fire to whatever location tile you're currently on, which can be really harmful if your teammates are there. But of course, if you time it right and there are a bunch of enemies there, well, it sounds a lot better if they're the ones dealing with those consequences. Or maybe instead of lighting things on fire, your illness is a little bit less deadly, and maybe you have narcolepsy and you just happen to fall asleep anytime that your insanity gets triggered. Well, the bad thing about this is that you're going to be laying your character down, and it's going to cost you an action to stand back up. But the positive thing is that when you are in your sleep state, no enemies are going to pay any attention to you, and you are completely safe. So if you are just about to die, or if you're in a room that is filled with enemies and there's no escape, well, that could be a great moment to take a little nap. You might be asking, how do these insanities actually get triggered? And this is going to happen anytime your insanity meter reaches one of these red orbs, and each player is going to be tracking this on their own personal player sheet. And the way that your insanity increases is through a variety of ways, but mainly it's through dice rolling. And there's going to be tentacles on some of the dice, and if you happen to roll that tentacle, it's going to increase your insanity. You're going to be rolling these dice anytime you enter combat, so this is always an opportunity to increase your insanity, which you might want to do to try and trigger your illness, but it also allows you to level up one of your character stats anytime that you hit one of those red orbs, so it does have a few effects that you can take advantage of, but you don't want to push it too hard, because if you ever reach the end of your insanity track, well, you go completely insane and you are eliminated from the game. So this creates a really amazing and fun dynamic where there are a bunch of competing goals here, because you want to increase your insanity so that you can level up your character, but then you also only want to hit those red orbs at certain moments so that you can maximize the effects of whatever insanity you have associated with your character. But then you also don't want to level it up too quickly, because it can cause you to completely go insane and be eliminated from the game. And of course, those dice that I was referring to are also going to be used to land hits or avoid hits, so you're not only going to be worried about the tentacles whenever you enter combat. So there are a lot of elements at play here that you are trying to manage. But it's not all death and insanity, because you can actually issue rerolls by using your stress. So it's death, insanity, and stress. And with all that said, it's no surprise that this is my favorite co-op game ever made, so this one is also my personal pick of the week. I really love this game, and every game impresses me, and every game is a lot of fun. And what I really love about this game opposed to Zombicide is the way that the enemies work. In Zombicide, I feel like I'm always managing a whole bunch of hordes of zombies, and it's a lot of overhead, and all the zombies kind of act the same, whereas all the enemies in this act very differently from each other and have very different effects. And there is still a bit of management there on the enemy's turn, but it just doesn't feel as cumbersome as it does in Zombicide. And I guess I should probably mention how you actually do win the game, and it does vary from scenario to scenario, but they all kind of follow the same structure, and that's that there's going to be some sort of objective that you're trying to achieve in order to disrupt a ritual, and once you disrupt the ritual, that's going to cause the boss monster to get summoned onto the board. But it is also possible for the boss to get summoned to the board before you disrupt the ritual, and if that happens, the boss is essentially invincible until you achieve that objective. But the way that happens is that you're going to be drawing cards at the end of each of your turn, and there's always a chance that those cards can cause the boss monster to move up this track, and if it ever hits the red area, then it's going to get summoned to the board. When this happens, you just replace the monster on the board with a token that you're going to use to track it moving forward, and then if that token ever reaches the end of the track, well then that's another way that you lose the game. But once that Elder God is summoned onto the board, players are going to be doing everything they can to try and destroy it. But of course it won't be easy because there's going to be a whole bunch of other enemies getting in your way, and of course you are fighting an Elder God, so that's pretty incredible already. But not only that, each Elder God is also going to be going through multiple different stages, adding new special abilities to their arsenal, which is going to make them progressively more difficult, and you're going to have to defeat them at all of their different stages if you want to win the game. Did I mention that this is a really difficult game? But this new expansion is going to be a standalone edition of the game, so you can decide if you want to get just the old content or the new content or both. I did go all in the first campaign, and there is quite a lot of content there. I haven't played through all of it yet, but I do expect that I will eventually. I think I'm 3/4 of the way through all the scenarios. But that being said, every one of the scenarios is very replayable, and I have already played multiple of the scenarios over again, and it always results with a very different outcome, especially when you can change up your different characters and your insanities and the different final bosses that you're going to be going up against. So I really don't think you need all of this content, and if you're on the fence, you're probably best just choosing one or the other, whichever one looks more appealing to you, and just sticking with that. But if you're like me and this is one of your favorite games of all time, then yeah, you should probably go all in, because that's what I'm going to tell myself. And of course, this new expansion is going to be adding a lot more of the same with some new tiles, new cultists, new scenarios, and new enemies and great old ones. But it's also going to be adding a new concept of unknown monsters. And the way that these work is that you're going to be randomly selecting 2 at the start of the game. And then there's going to be certain events that will trigger those monsters being entered into the game. And you can mix those with the original content as well. And yeah, that will make an already difficult game more difficult. So if you are including those unknown monsters, then you'll probably also want to include the new module, which is the relics module. And the way that the relic cards work is that in addition to picking your character and your insanity, you'll also be able to choose a relic card at the start of the game. This is going to give you an additional special ability, and it will also get upgraded to a more powerful version of that special ability at some point in the game once you've hit a certain insanity threshold. So that's a really good tool if you want to make the game just a little bit easier, or if you want to balance it back to the difficulty that it is originally, if you're including some of these other modules that make the game more difficult. And of course, there's going to be a whole stack of new investigators that you can play as well as new discovery cards. And my most favorite addition is a bunch more insanities, because the one qualm I did have with the original game is that there's really not many insanities, and they are a ton of fun, and they actually create some pretty hilarious scenarios when they play out in certain ways. And I just always wanted to see a lot more added to the game, and I'm really glad to see that that's actually happening. But if you're as excited about this one as I am, or maybe just mildly interested, I do have the links to the campaign in the description below. And if it's launched, you can check it out, or if it hasn't launched yet, you can click that notify me button. I'm not sure if this one's going to have any freebies at the start of the campaign, but it's always good to check out on day one just in case, especially since the first campaign did have some limited pledges originally at the beginning, but eventually those pledges did open up a little bit. But if you did pledge for those limited pledges earlier, you were getting a discount as well as an earlier delivery time. Like I said, no clue if they're going to be doing that again, but that was how the original campaign was run, so it's good to check as soon as possible to see if there's anything that you can jump in on for day one. And also launching on the 26th, we have Masterminds Heist Society, and this plays 2 to 5 players. It takes about 30 to 90 minutes to play, and this is also a campaign that I thought was launching a month or two back, so I did already cover this one, and I'll go ahead and re-roll that footage for you now. And this is a competitive game where players are criminals trying to complete different heists, and in this game, players are going to be drafting their own team of criminals, each with different skills, and they can have these different skills in areas like driving, combat, stealth, or other areas to help you complete your heists. Players are going to be trying to attempt to complete different heist cards in order to score victory points, and each heist is going to have 4 levels to it, and players will be using their team's skills as well as their gear cards to try and gain victory points depending on the difficulty of that heist. Each turn, players will be able to choose whether they want to perform a prep action or a heist action, and if they choose a prep action, then they'll be able to gain a new criminal card, and they'll also be able to draw prep cards to help them in following rounds, which give them things like additional actions, gear, or interrupt cards that allow them to perform reactions to other players' turns. But if they choose to perform a heist action, then they'll be able to try and complete a step on one of the heists. And they're going to be doing this by choosing their team and combining those stats in order to help fulfill the requirements of the card. Then you're also going to be able to roll a die to try and add an amount to your base skill. And if you have any prep cards that you might have gained on a previous turn, you'll be able to use those to augment the outcome of your dice roll or help you in various ways to help complete that step. There is a push your luck aspect here because you'll be able to decide if you want to continue or pause, and if you do fail any of the steps that you try to complete, then there's going to be a penalty card that you get as a result of that. And once a certain amount of heists are completed, or a single player reaches a number of victory points, that's going to trigger the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points wins. And launching on October 27th, we have Hyperwars, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 10 to 15 minutes to play. And this is also a campaign that I just discovered, so I wasn't able to do my usual research, so I'll just go ahead and read the description here and give you a little bit of an idea of how the game plays. But Hyperwars is a cyberpunk-themed real-time area control board game, and in this game, players are taking on the roles of large corporations set in a dystopian city. The game is played over 2 phases. There's the action phase, which is played in real time for exactly 5 minutes, and there's no player turns. Instead, players are going to be performing all actions simultaneously, and during this phase, they're going to be using their action cards to deploy agents and to move goods from their sources to their districts in which they control. Then the scoring phase is going to happen after the action phase ends, and during this phase, the player with the most agents in a given district is said to have control of it and has the chance to fulfill the needs of that district, getting points for that or penalties if they are the one in control but are unable to fulfill those needs. And once all those districts are resolved, the player with the most points wins the game. Also launching on the 27th, we have Die-namo, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes just 15 to 30 minutes to play. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to get dealt a few different cards, and then those cards are going to be revealed face up, and any cards that are the same color are going to get paired together into a single stack. But then you're also going to be dealing out a few cards on the table, and those also get turned face up, and also any cards matching the same color will also get stacked. But the way that this game works is that for each player's turn, there's going to be a new card revealed and added to that shared row, and then that player can decide if they want to roll the colored die or if they want to roll the numbered die. Whatever color or number they roll, they'll be able to take a matching card from that shared row that matches that color or number. That's not the only option that a player has, because instead of just taking one card from that shared row, they can instead place the die on one of their own rows in order to make a bet. And sometimes you might just want to do this because there were no matches with your die in the main row. But when you place a die onto one of your stacks, you're essentially making a bet that you're going to roll a value matching one of the cards in that stack. So since this player is betting on their yellow row, they want to roll either a 4, a 6, or whatever is on this third card. If they're able to do that, they'll be able to take any card they want from the shared row, but because the color that they rolled also matches the color that they're betting on, they can actually take a full stack from the shared row. I don't see any stacks there right now, but if there was a stack, then they would be able to take it. But if they made the bet and then rolled the die and didn't match any of the numbers in the stack that they bet on, then they lose that entire stack of cards and it goes into the shared row. So there's a risk here of losing your cards, and the really fun thing about that is that your bigger stacks will give you a higher probability of rolling the number that you need, but then also come at a higher cost of losing more cards if you're unable to roll one of those numbers. But the goal of this game is to try and complete an entire stack of a single color, and whichever player is able to do that first wins the game. And also launching on October 27th, we have Copan, the Dying City, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 180 minutes to play. And this one is a Euro game where players are going to be placing their workers out on the board to perform different actions. And one thing that I really like about this, and I think looks really interesting, is that your worker is actually the cylinder here, and it's going to have an icon on both sides. And when you go to place or move that worker out on the board, you're going to be placing it on one of these triangle locations. And each of these is going to be associated with a different action out on the board, and I'll go through those in a minute. But what's really interesting about the way that these work is that you can go ahead and move your worker to a different location if you want to on your following turn. But if you keep that worker at that specific location, it's actually going to go around this circle here. And when you first place the worker, it goes on the top spot on that circle, and it's going to cost you whatever resource is indicated there. But if you decide not to perform a different action on your following turn and you leave your worker there, then it's going to rotate around to this next spot on that circle. And if you placed your worker with this side up, it means that you'll be able to take any resource of your choice. But if you placed your worker with this side up, it means that you're going to get 2 victory points. And if you leave your worker there a second time, it's going to rotate again to this ×2 spot, which means that you're going to get whichever bonus you just got, but you're going to get it twice. And I just think that's a neat mechanism that I haven't seen in any other Euro games, and it's little details like this that make games stand out and differentiate themselves from other games out on the market. But what are the different actions that players can perform? And the first one is to create an embassy in one of the many cities. And this action location in the top left of the board represents some different cities, and players can pay a cost to put their token at one of the cities, and that's going to grant them access to the special ability that that city provides. It's also going to grant a one-time bonus for doing that. Or you can visit the action location at the top of the board, and this is going to allow you to gain tokens of different resources, and you'll be able to use these resources to increase your resource generation of that particular resource, which is going to allow you to build up a little engine that you'll be able to manage throughout the game. Players will each have their own player board to keep track of the resources that they currently have on hand, but these boards can also be extended by adding more space to your warehouse, allowing you to store more of those resources later in the game. The players can also visit the right-hand side of the board where you can purchase different cards. And these cards can grant you permanent or one-time use abilities, or they can also give you different scoring opportunities that, if you are able to meet certain requirements, will grant you extra victory points at the end of the game. And then in the bottom left side of the board, there is an action space that has a couple main uses. It's going to grant you some cards, but then it also allows you to move your priests up the staircase of the central temple, which will kind of work as a multiplier that will gain you more victory points at the end of the game. But the way that this action space works is that you'll be able to choose one of these 3 rows, and if you're choosing the top row, you're going to be getting more cards and less steps up those staircases, but if you choose the bottom row, then you're going to be getting less cards and more steps up the staircase. And the reason that you want to collect these cards is that if you get certain sets of particular colors, you'll be able to trade those in for different pieces of your Jade Mask, and you're going to be piecing together this Jade Mask as you progress throughout the game, and covering up different icons on the mask will allow you to get those instant benefits, and if you fully complete it, it's worth 10 victory points at the end of the game. And the final action space located at the bottom of the board is a really interesting one, because this one actually allows you to combo certain actions together, because each of these cards is going to have 3 different actions on them that can be unlocked if you perform a particular action out on the board. Of course, these come at a cost to gain, but then you have the potential of cascading your actions together later in the game. And throughout the game, players will also find opportunities to gain tokens and place them out on the 4 different corners of the main temple. And whenever you do that, you're going to be able to gain the resource of the token that you placed, but also you'll be able to gain the resources of any of the orthogonally adjacent tokens. Each round, you're also going to be rolling the event die, and then you're going to match that icon with the current event card. And then it's going to activate whichever effect is outlined on the card for that particular icon. These cards can switch up and change throughout the game, so even if you roll the same value on the die, you can actually get a different outcome. And these can have all sorts of effects that can affect the players or the main play area, and can even permanently block out action spaces for the rest of the game. And the game continues like this, with players building up their engine of cascading actions, abilities, and resource generation, and then using all those to transfer into victory points. And the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And also launching on the 27th, we have a reprint campaign for the game Die of the Dead, as well as 2 brand new expansions. There's going to be the Ofrenda expansion, as well as the Zolos expansion. The first expansion is going to be adding more dice and double layer boards, and it's going to be converting the game into a more thinky puzzle game where players are trying to build the best altars. The Zolos expansion is going to be adding a Zolos dog that's going to be guiding players to the different caskets. It's also going to be offering alternate casket boards, more custom dice, and new ways to manipulate your results. And if you're not familiar with Die of the Dead, this is a campaign that I covered a super long time ago, and I'm a little bit hesitant to show you this footage, but I did cover this in the past, and I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And in Die of the Dead, players are taking on the roles of friendly spirits who are guiding souls back to the land of the living. To do this, players are going to manipulate and roll caskets containing dice that represent souls. You'll have a few resources to help you, but you're going to need a little bit of luck. I'm really interested to see some more on this game, but the first player to guide 9 souls wins the game. And there you have it, another crazy week with too many games keeping me up way too late, but also there's a lot of really interesting ones that I'm probably going to back. But don't leave yet, because we still have a few awesome giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. You don't have to like, you don't have to subscribe, you don't have to give me any of your personal information. All you have to do is leave a comment down below, and that will get you automatically entered into this giveaway. We do giveaways here every single week, and I'll draw the winner for these giveaways at the end of the following week, so it's really short turnaround. You can see if you won pretty quickly, and even if you don't tune in, I'll still reach out and try to get your attention and make sure that the game is getting into your hands. But the first giveaway we have is for a game that I am personally super interested in. I am very much considering backing this one myself because it looks like a pretty incredible game, and this one is Rone Invasion. And my interest on this one is purely on the design. I think it has some really interesting elements with the way that the resources work and how you have a few different subsets of actions, and they all get activated in different ways. So if you generate some resources and then spend those, you'll be able to perform some actions, but then if you keep those resources for your following turn, then you'll be able to use those for a completely different subset of actions. But then you can also collect some other resources known as scrap metal, which can be used for a totally different subset of actions. But at the core of this game, it is a dice builder, and that's not something I see in very many games, because you're actually going to be able to manipulate the dice in this game by adding little screws in and out of the dice of different colors in order to manipulate the dice to roll more of what you want to roll. And the cool thing about these little screws is that they actually double as resources in other parts of the game. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag Rone. And since this game involves screws, maybe you could let us know of your most recent home improvement project, or maybe some other project that you worked on where you built something, and let us know what it was and how it went. And it's probably not a surprise to any of you, but in addition to my modesty, I'm actually a man of many skills, and I used to actually be a professional carpenter, and I just have a natural tendency to do a lot of DIY projects, partially because I'm interested and partially because I'm really tight with my money. Board games are expensive. But I'm currently working on upgrading my bathroom with a curbless shower, and it's looking pretty awesome and pretty bougie. Still working on it, but I'm hoping to get all the tile work done over this next week. And the next giveaway we have is for a pledge for Mind Your Business. And in this game, players are going to be controlling their little gnome meeple out on the main board, and you're going to be using your meeple in order to move around different tiles. You're going to be trying to line up paths on the cards that share the same type of mineral, because the better that you line up the cards, the more minerals you'll be able to pick up with a single action with your mining cart. And the way that players will be manipulating the different tiles is by rotating and swapping tiles adjacent to where their gnome currently is out on the grid. And this giveaway is going to be for the Journeyman Miner Pledge, which is going to come with both copies of Mind Your Business, which can also be combined for up to 4 players. And that's also going to give you all unlocked stretch goals. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag mine, and let us know what your favorite precious metal or favorite gemstone is. For me, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. Gold.
I love gold!
Not only is it worth a ton of money, but it also appreciates over time, and it just looks really nice and has some really interesting properties like its conductivity and its ability not to rust or tarnish. I mean, and then there's palladium, which is worth even more money and just has a really cool name, but I don't really know anything about it. Now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaway. And the first one we had was for 7th Sea, City of the Five Sails. And to draw a winner, I use this fancy application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you like this sort of content and want to help make all these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me, I do have a Patreon down below, and I truly appreciate any support that you are able to give. But let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner for Seventh Seas is Javier Martin, and this is one of our viewers, and he says that he's been waiting so long for Slay the Spire. And also I did ask the viewers to leave a comment letting me know of if I were to rename this channel to a pirate theme, what would they suggest? And he says Ducky Blackwing. And I think this guy would look pretty cool with some ink on his wing. But congratulations, just reach out to me at adam@shelfclutter.com and I'll get that pledge all sorted out. And the next giveaway we had was for the Nazo Nazo playing cards. We're going to do the exact same thing here and draw those comments. And let's see who is the winner. And the winner is Andrew Money, and this is one of our Patreon subscribers, so I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for the Nazo Nazo playing cards. And that is everything I have for you this week. I hope this video has been useful. And that is everything I have for you this week. I hope this video is helpful, and hopefully there aren't too many games that are trying to pry open your wallet, but hopefully there's at least one or two that you're interested in. I'm super excited for whatever new content they plan to add to Cthulhu Death May Die, but I'm also a little bit worried about the amount of space it's probably going to take up. I want to say that I hope they don't add another 3-foot miniature to the game, but I kind of just want it all. And maybe that's my insanity. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.